Roush Fenway Racing, Team Penske, Richard Childress Racing. What do all three of these teams have in common? Well, they've won Cup races, Daytona 500s, and Cup Series titles. But that's not what links all three of these teams. What does is the fact that these teams have all fielded an effort in the sports car ranks. That's diversifying your racing portfolio.
At Flashback to the Track, we love race teams that diversify their portfolios and compete in a number of different series. Today, we're going to talk about some of our favorite NASCAR teams that have also fielded sports cars at some point in their history. Some of them you've probably heard of, but we bet there's a few that you haven't. James, kick us off.
Let's start with a team that has been synonymous with sports car racing since its inception, Roush Fenway Racing. Jack Roush has been fielding cars in IMSA and Trans Am long before he started a NASCAR team. In the 1980s, Chevrolet was dominating Trans Am competition with their Camaro, so the Ford Motor Company turned to Jack Roush to build them a car to beat Chevrolet. Roush would partner with this new company, Protofab, and these guys, Bill Riley and Gary Pratt. You ever heard of them? The newly dubbed Roush Protofab team fielded 2 Mercury Capris in Trans Am competition in 1984. The team won 12 out of 18 races that season with drivers Gary Pickett and Tom Gloyd. The team dominated again in 1985, winning 13 of 16 races with drivers Willie T. Ribbs and Wally Dallenbach Jr., who would also capture the Drivers' Championship. In fact, Wally told us about his time with the Roush Protofab team in an episode of the Flashback to the Track podcast. Be sure to check that out. In the endurance ranks, the team claimed class victories in the IMSA GTO category at the 1985 Rolex 24 and 12 Hours of Sebring. It didn't matter whether it was a Cougar or a Mustang Fox body. The Roush Protofab team went on to capture 10 consecutive Rolex 24 GTO class victories with driver lineups that featured names like Scott Pruett, Robbie Gordon, Mark Martin, and Paul Newman, just to name a few. Roush would have another reign of domination in Trans Am during the mid-90s with driver Tommy Kindle. Kindle drove the all-sport Mustang Cobra to 3 consecutive driver championships from 1995 to 1997. He even won 11 consecutive races in 1997. How do you compete with that? After a brief stint away from sports cars, Roush would return in 2006, fielding a Mustang in Grand Am, World Challenge, and eventually IMSA's Continental Tire Series, before shutting down the Roush road racing program at the end of 2018. Let's hope we see Roush back in IMSA someday soon.
Next up is Chip Ganassi Racing. Chip Ganassi has been involved in all types of different racing series for decades. His team ownership began in kart in 1989. Throughout the 1990s, Ganassi fielded one of the most dominant teams in kart history, winning 4 consecutive championships from 1996 to 1999 with drivers Jimmy Vasser, Alex Zanardi, and Juan Pablo Montoya. Ganassi expanded his ownership to NASCAR in 2001 when he partnered with longtime team owner Felix Sabates, and in 2004 he expanded his operation to sports cars. CGR fielded a 2-car Grand Am Daytona prototype effort in 2004, and their number 01 car dominated the season with drivers Max Pappas and Scott Pruett. They would go on to claim the championship. Ganassi's teams would win 6 Rolex 24s overall between 2006 and 2015, using drivers from both their IndyCar and NASCAR efforts, guys like Dan Weldon, Jamie McMurray, Casey Mears, and of course, Juan Pablo Montoya. During this tenure, Scott Pruett would also claim 5 drivers' titles and win 40 races overall, making him one of the most prolific drivers in IMSA history. In 2016, Ganassi partnered with Ford to field a 2-car factory effort in IMSA's GTLM class with the Ford GT. This partnership also included a 2-car effort in the World Endurance Championship. In their inaugural season, the team won the 24 Hours of Le Mans in the GTE Pro class. It was also on the 50th anniversary of Ford's first victory at Le Mans. The IMSA teams won the Rolex 24 in class in 2017 and 2018. And fun fact, Ganassi's 4 Ford GTs carried the numbers 66, 67, 68, and 69, because those are the 4 years that Ford won Le Mans overall in the 1960s. Unfortunately, the Ford GT effort went away at the conclusion of the 2019 racing season, and Ganassi did not compete in sports cars at all in 2020. Fortunately, Ganassi is back in IMSA in 2021 with a Cadillac DPI effort that features former Haas F1 driver Kevin Magnussen in its driver lineup. Knowing Ganassi's sports car history, it's safe to say that they're probably going to be competing for podiums right away.
Next is the team owned by the captain himself, Team Penske. Roger Penske's sports car days date all the way back to the 1960s, when he fielded a Chevy Camaro in what would become the Trans-American Championship, winning the overall series title in 1968 and 1969. Penske also fielded a Lola T70 in the legendary Can-Am series and won the 1969 24 Hours of Daytona. Penske then left sports car racing in the early 70s. That was until he returned in 2006 to field a 2-car Porsche RS Spyder LMP2 effort in the American Le Mans series. These cars dominated the field, winning championships in all 3 years of competition. In 2008, Penske fielded an entry for the Rolex 24 in partnership with Wayne Taylor Racing. Penske would return to Grand Am in 2009 with a full-time Porsche Riley Daytona prototype effort. Drivers Romain Dumas and Timo Bernhard finished 7th in the overall series standings. Almost 10 years later, Penske once again returned to road racing, full-time in 2018 with a 2-car Acura factory effort in IMSA's DPI category. The Penske Acura ARX-05 DPI won 8 races overall and claimed both the 2019 and 2020 driver and team titles before Acura ended their partnership with Penske. But Roger Penske has vowed to one day race at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Let's just hope that day is coming sooner rather than later. I'm just saying.
Next up is Rick Ware Racing. Everyone's favorite underdog NASCAR team actually got their start in sports cars as Ware and Sons Racing. They fielded cars in the SCCA and in IMSA throughout the late 80s and early 1990s. In fact, Rick Ware himself was a very accomplished road racer. He even tried to make the 1998 Winston Cup race at Sonoma. Ware returned to sports car racing in 2011, fielding a Porsche GT3 Cup car in that year's Rolex 24 at Daytona. They returned to the race in 2012 with a Ford Mustang, and they actually ran some additional races that year as well at Road America and Indianapolis. RWR also fielded an entry in the 2014 Lamborghini Super Trofeo Series for his son Cody, who claimed Rookie of the Year honors. In 2019, they made a huge splash, entering the Asian Le Mans Series with 2 Ligier LMP2 cars. The team chose to race in the Asian Le Mans Series because the champion of each class gets an automatic bid at the next year's 24 Hours of Le Mans. Cody Ware drove the number 52 car to the LMP2 AM Class Championship. So Rick Ware 1 for 1 in Asian Le Mans Series championships. Be sure to check out our Flashback to the Track podcast episode with Cody Ware, where he tells us all about his time racing in sports cars growing up and some really cool stuff about that Asian Le Mans Series championship. RWR has committed to a return to sports cars in 2021, starting with IMSA's Rolex 24 in January. And hopefully it's the first of many sports car races for the team on US soil.
Now, most of you probably don't remember American Equipment Racing. Maybe if I said David Green, Caterpillar number 96. Yeah, that American Equipment Racing. Like Roush Racing, they were a team that started in sports cars, competing in IMSA and Trans Am throughout the 80s and 90s. The team was founded by American Equipment Company owner Howard "Buzz" McCall, who also drove an IMSA GTO and GTU. He even finished second in the GTO class of the 1988 Rolex 24 with co-driver Jack Baldwin. Now, during the early 90s, they were the team to beat in Trans Am competition. They won four consecutive Trans Am titles from 1991 to 1994. Driver Scott Sharp and Jack Baldwin finished first and second 3 years in a row and combined to win 19 out of 38 races from 1991 until 1993. And the team had some of the most amazing sponsors with the most iconic paint schemes in racing. I mean, they had the Skoll Camaro, the Duracell Camaro, the Hot Wheels Camaro, the Rain-X Camaro. Eat your heart out, Camaros!
Now it's time for Richard Childress Racing. Yes, Richard Childress owned a sports car team. And no, it wasn't some like cool late 80s IMSA GTO effort with like Dale Earnhardt and people driving the car. It was a Grand Am Daytona prototype entry in 2008 and 2009. In 2008, Richard Childress Racing announced a partnership with Howard Motorsports in the Grand Am Daytona prototype class. The team fielded a Pontiac Crawford at the second Watkins Glen race for drivers Andy Wallace and Andy Lally in preparation for a full season in 2009. Andy Wallace and Rob Finley were tabbed as the full season drivers, and at the Rolex 24, they were joined by RCR NASCAR driver Casey Mears and IndyCar star Danica Patrick. The team finished 8th in the Rolex 24, but had a really down year and decided to dissolve at the end of the season. But the Grand Am team wasn't Richard Childress Racing's only foray into American sports car racing. Their company ECR Engines actually makes all the engines for the IMSA Daytona prototype Cadillac teams. Yeah, RCR doesn't just make engines for NASCAR and ARCA, they make badass prototype engines as well. In fact, ECR Engines won 8 straight engine manufacturer titles in IMSA from 2012 to 2018, and they've also won 4 consecutive Rolex 24s from 2017 to 2020.
Truck Series fans rejoice! It's Morgan Dollar Motorsports. Now, Morgan Dollar Motorsports is best known for their efforts in NASCAR's Truck Series. That's because Dennis Setzer drove the number 46 Silverado to 3 consecutive second place points finishes from 2003 until 2005. But what most people don't know is the team briefly fielded cars in Grand Am during the early 2000s. The program stemmed from Rob Morgan, whose background was primarily in road racing. Morgan co-drove one of 2 Chevy Corvettes in the American GT class in 2002 alongside his father Charles. The second car was driven by brothers Andrew and Stephen Richards. This program would have really good success in its first season, capturing 2 race wins, the 6 Hours of Watkins Glen and the season finale at Daytona. In 2003, the team came within 15 minutes of winning the GTS class at the Rolex 24, but unfortunately would have to settle for second. That makes me think of that one time I came within 15 minutes of Modest Mouse tickets. Except I didn't even get a second place award, I got nothing. So, after one final start, the team would shut down their sports car program to focus on their NASCAR efforts, which was perfect timing because after that, they went on that 3-year runner-up points streak, so...
Last but not least, we have to talk about the legendary Hendrick Motorsports Corvette GTP team. If you're not familiar with the Corvette GTP of the 1980s, it was one of the first American branded prototype cars to compete in IMSA's GTP class. The program was put together by General Motors to compete with the foreign brands that were dominating the series, teams like Nissan, Porsche, and Mazda. In 1985, Hendrick Motorsports was tabbed to join Chevrolet's factory-backed GTP effort in IMSA. The car was sponsored by GM Goodwrench and hit the track with lead driver, the legendary David Hobbs. Unfortunately, 1985 was marred by mechanical failures and a whole bunch of issues, but the team persisted. In 1986, drivers Doc Bundy and Cyril Vandermeer took wins at Road Atlanta and Palm Beach. Unfortunately, these would be the only 2 wins in the history of the Corvette GTP program. The car just flew too close to the sun. It was just too fast for the components on it, and parts would break constantly. Hendrick Motorsports left IMSA at the end of the 1988 season, but the legend of the Corvette GTP lives on. Despite not winning very much, it's a fan favorite and it's remembered by anyone who drove it as being incredible to drive when it didn't break down.
And there you have it, a look back at some of our favorite NASCAR teams that also fielded sports car teams. Did we miss any? Let us know in the comments below. Also, feel free to chime in with any topics, races, drivers, series, cars, what have you that we should be covering on this channel. We always love to sink our teeth into some new topics. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more of our motorsports content. I love you.